the supplement oversight people are always trying to play catch up about what some of the unscrupulous companies are doing and putting into their products. What that means is, even though I think the FDA is doing their absolute best, and I think the supplement industry, I wouldn't say you should just completely avoid supplements. I do think a large proportion of the burden shifts to the consumer when it comes to finding good supplement products that are effective, that are pure, and that are safe.
Welcome to the Train with Xan podcast,
where our goal is to help you look, feel, and perform like an athlete.
In each episode, we're interviewing experts in training, nutrition, and sports performance
who will help you separate fact from fiction in the fitness industry.
Now, here's your host, a former professional athlete,
certified personal trainer, and nutrition coach,
Xan Barksdale.
And we are back with another episode of the Train with Xan podcast. My name's Xan Barksdale. I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in. Really excited about the show we have lined up for today. I would say I get asked more often than anything else, Xan, what are you taking? What supplements are you on? What should I take? It's a very interesting topic that a lot of people are curious about. So today's guest, we brought on a sport nutrition and supplement researcher who's going to answer all these questions for us. We really got the episode broken down into 3 distinct segments. In the first part of the show, we're going to talk about the whole nutrition industry or the supplement industry as a whole, help you how you should choose your supplements, some websites to review. And then we're going to talk about specific supplements for health and wellness, and then we'll get into supplements for sports performance, because there's really a couple different things going on there. There's a lot of science out there, a lot of information. There's also a lot of really bad information that people go to and they turn to on the internet when they're trying to figure out what they should put in their bodies. So this episode is all about helping you figure out which supplements you should put into your body for your specific goals. As always, the show notes and links and timestamps will be on the website at trainwithxan.com/005. This is episode number 5. So it's trainwithxan.com/005. And while you're on the website, go ahead and enter your email address so you can sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be sure that you never miss a show, and you'll get all the updates whenever I upload a new video, post a new article, or release a new podcast episode like this. So again, really excited about today's episode. I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Let's get this party started in 3, 2, 1.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Train with Xan podcast. Really excited about today's guest. Today we have somebody who's really a phenomenally smart guy, but he also puts to use the information he talks about as well. He's the director of education for StrongerByScience.com, which is one of the leading resources for evidence-based information about fitness and nutrition. He's also a pro natural bodybuilder, so I really like to be able to talk with somebody who can combine the best of both worlds. He's got his PhD in human movement sciences from UNC at Chapel Hill, and he's also published, I believe, a number of dozens of peer-reviewed papers. He also has a number of other letters and credentials behind his name. He's a certified sports nutritionist from the ISSN. He's a CSCS with distinction, and he's a sports nutritionist and bodybuilding coach. This is one of the guys he's a leading mind in the world of evidence-based nutrition and programming. So very excited to talk today with Eric Trexler.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Well, appreciate it, Eric. And as I've told everybody that's read the headline, today we want to spend most of our time talking about supplements. And you really wrote a really good article on Stronger by Science recently. There have been 2. There's been one on creatine, and then there was another one recently on the regulation of supplements. And I think that's an area where a lot of people have questions. It seems like, for me, a lot of people are very skeptical of supplements just because they don't know much about them. They think they're not regulated by the FDA, and they don't know what's in their product. They hear the horror stories about somebody taking something and then failing a drug test later. But you hit a lot of really good and important topics in that article. Can you kind of start for us with, how is the supplement industry regulated, and what does somebody do, who wants to make sure they're putting safe supplements into their body?
Yeah, I mean, so just to give an idea of my background, I've been using supplements for ages. When you're a young, teenage kid, you get into lifting, it's like the first thing you want to do is try supplements because they seem like they're going to be super effective and easy to use. And then as a researcher, most of my research, I think at this point I've published about 40 papers, and I'd say the majority have been on dietary supplements, or at least a huge proportion of those papers. And so then I started getting interested in more of the academic aspects of, not just how does it feel when I take them, but what does the evidence say? And more importantly, if there is evidence supporting their use, how do we relay that to a consumer so that they're actually using this effectively? And one of the things that was driving me crazy was the more I looked into it, I would see on like very reputable websites, like very legit websites saying like, well, everybody knows that the FDA doesn't regulate supplements. So and I was like, well, that can't be the case. And so basically I set out to write this article to kind of, first of all, learn it for myself, and then second of all, share that and kind of clear the air. So in the process of writing the article, I talked to one of the top lawyers in the country that deals with like supplement law and steroid law, because as I was reading through it, I was like, clearly I'm misinterpreting this. And then I call him and he goes, nope, you got it, which is usually not a good sign. But
yeah, I saw where you referenced Rick Collins at the bottom, who's very well known in that type field. So I thought it was interesting, and I thought he was probably a good resource for the article.
Oh, he was incredible. He gave me so much of his time. He looked over the article after it was done. Because again, I was almost like a little bit in disbelief of like, there's no way that this loophole's open. He's like, yeah, you can do that. But anyway, so to give a general description of how supplements are regulated, this has been a thorn in the government's side for like 100 years. So even in the early 1900s, some of these supplement type products were kind of making their way onto the market, and the government didn't know what to do with them because they're not a drug and they're not food. So I kind of go through the legislative history in the article, but it all ends up in 1994. We passed a law called DSHEA, D-S-H-E-A, and that pretty much still dictates how supplements are regulated. And they're basically regulated as a special subcategory of food products. So they're certainly not regulated to the same extent as a drug. And frankly, if they were, we probably just wouldn't have supplements. You probably see in news articles like it costs how many $1 billion to get a new drug to market. No one's going to spend $1 billion getting a new form of protein to the market because they're never going to make it back. They're never going to come close. So there's pros and cons to this. But basically, this legislation defines what counts as a supplement. It also regulates, what ingredients can find their way in, and it gives the FDA the ability to do something called post-market regulation. And so what that means is if you create a product that kind of fits these criteria that the FDA says, these are supplements, these ingredients are already good to go. If you create a product that already conforms to all these guidelines, you and I could basically make a product and put it on the market within a matter of weeks without really doing much at all in terms of getting it approved by anybody. The problem is, or not the problem, but the way this works is once it's on the market, the FDA does have the authority to regulate that. And so if they find out we're putting stuff in that we shouldn't be, they can take it off the market. If they find out that, our manufacturing practices don't meet regulations, they can take it off the market. There's another governing body called the FTC, and the FTC works with the FDA to make sure that advertisements and the claims that companies make about their supplements are not misleading and don't cross any lines in terms of, you can't say, take this supplement because it's going to, cure your heart disease or cure your diabetes. Those would be more disease-related claims that are completely off the table. So the FTC does more when it comes to advertising and claims. But, so what we see is this kind of this two-branched oversight apparatus where there's the FDA and the FTC, and they fully do have the authority to keep supplement companies in line. But the thing that really distinguishes supplement regulation is that it happens after the supplement gets to market in the vast majority of cases.
That was one of the big takeaways I took from the article. I thought that was the most interesting thing, that it seems like everything's happening after the fact. So if somebody were to come out with a new supplement or a new ingredient, they can put it out there, and then if something bad happens or if we find out there's side effects later, that really happens, I guess later on down the road.
Yeah, and that's actually a very important distinction. And I'm not a lawyer by any means. So the getting used to this distinction in terminology is not what I'm used to. But you mentioned a new supplement or a new ingredient, and those are two wildly separate concepts when it comes to supplement regulation. So let's say you and I want to make a supplement. We want to use a whole bunch of ingredients that were already on the market in 1994, which is when this supplement legislation was passed. We could do that, get it on the market, and really minimal requirement to notify anybody about anything. Now, if we wanted to put a new ingredient on the market, what we would be required to essentially notify the FDA, at least I think it's like 75 days before we intend to put it on the market, and say, hey, just so you guys know, here's this new ingredient that we're putting on the market. And the FDA has all the authority in the world to say they could look at that application for a new dietary ingredient, or the notification is the correct term. You notify them. You're not really asking for approval. You're just saying, hey, I'm going to do this. They still have the authority to say, no, you're not. And they can kind of come shut you down. But what you see is that much like every other human in the world, supplement company owners would much rather ask for forgiveness than permission. So like what they do in a lot of cases is they try to find some exemptions so that even if they have an ingredient that wasn't on the market in 1994, there's a couple big exemptions that they try to utilize so that they don't have to do this pre-market notification process. Because, it's somewhat like asking for permission, which invites the opportunity for the FDA to say no.
Sure.
And so the two big exemptions, one is pretty intuitive. The other one is extremely counterintuitive. So the intuitive one is if you can make a decent claim that the ingredient you're using is present in the food supply and actually, reasonably expected to be ingested by humans in a chemically unaltered format, then you could basically say, listen, people are already eating this anyway. The fact that we've put it in the supplement product is not we have no reason to believe that would be risky whatsoever, because people are eating reasonable amounts of this in this exact same, chemically unaltered form. So that one's pretty intuitive. But what you'll see is some companies make some claims about like things that are like, oh yeah, this is definitely in the food supply in an unaltered form in reasonable amounts. And then you look into it and you're like, where? who is eating that?
Yeah.
And so sometimes they'll make a pretty dubious claim that they fit that exemption. The other exemption is pretty wild. So there's a concept known as GRAS. It's like generally recognized as safe. And there's a big list that the government made when they made some new legislation back in the day. And they made a huge list of food additives that they generally are going to just consider to be safe, just so that like what they were doing is overhauling the food additive legislation, but they needed to grandfather in a bunch of additives to make sure that they didn't have to like completely halt essentially like the production of the food supply. Like if you said, hey, good news for all food additives, now there's an application process. It's like, well, what do we do about all the additives that are already out there? So that was kind of the general premise of why they made this list. Apparently, there's an opportunity for a company to self-affirm a new dietary ingredient as being generally recognized as safe. And when it comes to that self-affirmation process, it would
conflict of interest, I would imagine. I mean,
well,
right?
Yeah, I was going to say in the legislation, there appears to be enough wiggle room that a company could form their own safety panel.
Oh, wow.
And there's not a lot from what I could tell in talking to Rick, there's not a lot of guidance about who actually qualifies to be on that panel, exactly what type of evidence they're required to review. And the thing I found to be most comical about it is that this panel meets, right? And there's huge potential for conflict of interest there, depending on who you put on it. and this panel meets and they write up their report and they make their determination, it would appear you don't even actually have to file the report. It sounds like it just has to exist. So like if the FDA comes back, 5 years after your supplement's been on the market and they say, hey, what's this ingredient? And you go, well, we determined it was safe. And they say, how? You basically just have to like go through the file cabinet and find that old PDF you had knocking around and be like, yeah, here's the safety panel's report on it.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. These were the types of things that I think because they're so blatantly there are such huge opportunities to abuse them. I think the FDA has a particular eye out for companies that lean on these exemptions. So it's not like the FDA has no idea and they'll never find out. But to me, it's kind of funny that within like the legal code that there are still these types of exemptions, especially the latter, that you're just like, man, that surely the FDA has got to close that up soon. And that's talking to Rick. He's of the opinion that the FDA keeps saying like, hey, this is getting abused. Please stop doing that. He thinks they're eventually probably, I don't want to speak for him, but it sounds like he thinks that they might close up that little opening at some point.
Which would probably be a good thing for all consumers, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would think so. I think I don't think they need to completely get rid of the first exemption, which is, if it's present in the food supply and it's, a chemically unaltered form, like there are instances where that's used very effectively and it's a very intuitive law. The self-affirmed recognizing something as safe in a self-affirmed manner, I think is I'd be happy to see that go away.
Sure. And it just sounds like common sense would tell you that almost everybody should agree with that. You would think, because you don't want a company that's reviewing their own product, telling you it's safe, and then with no real research to back that up. It just seems like we could go down a lot of different roads with that. But after doing this research and kind of coming to these conclusions, how do you feel overall about the supplement industry? I mean, is it trustworthy? Is it safe? Or do you feel like, maybe there's it's still the Wild West out there?
Well, it's definitely not the Wild West. And even in the Wild West, it wasn't the Wild West. So there was, everybody, when they think of an unscrupulous supplement salesperson, they call him like a snake oil salesman. So snake oil was an actual thing that was essentially sold as a supplement. It was like a medical tonic. And even back in like the very early 1900s, the guy that was selling snake oil, he still received penalties from the government. So like even in the Wild West, there was still some degree of oversight and some degree of penalization. So I still use supplements. I don't use as many as I used to. But, I don't think that the supplement industry as a whole is an industry that cannot be trusted. But I do think so when you look at the regulations on the books, if they were effectively enforced, I really don't think we would have much to worry about. The problem is it's so difficult to do it effectively and to not let some bad actors kind of slip through the cracks. So the FDA, it's not like, they certainly have the power to have this oversight. They do their very best with it, but it is a very difficult task. And I actually view it very similarly to like international sport and drug testing, right? So now when you see people fail drug tests, they don't fail the test they took in 2016. They fail the one they took in 2008. Because, the job of the drug testing authorities is basically we have to figure out what people were doing, then develop the test for it, and then test the samples. So most of the Olympic drug test failures you see nowadays are from Olympics that were 1 or 2 Olympics ago. Sometimes almost a decade ago, because it takes the time for them to figure out how are people cheating today, how do we test for it, and then we need to go back and actually test. It's kind of like a game of cat and mouse, but the mouse has an enormous head start. So that's kind of the analogy that I see when I look at supplement regulation is the supplement oversight people are always trying to play catch up about what some of the unscrupulous companies are doing and putting into their products. So what that means is, even though I think the FDA is doing their absolute best, and I think the supplement industry, I wouldn't say you should just completely avoid supplements. I do think a large proportion of the burden shifts to the consumer when it comes to finding good supplement products that are effective, that are pure, and that are safe.
I think that's an excellent point. It seems like now more than ever, whether it be supplements or medicine or just even going to doctor visits, the consumer is a lot more responsible for their own health and for their own decisions than we ever have been before. All you have to do is just watch TV. You can't turn on a television show for 30 minutes without seeing 10 advertisements for the newest drug, whether it be blood pressure or diabetes or whatever it is. We have to be more educated as a whole, which kind of brings me to one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you is, so for someone out there that's looking, to start taking supplements, where would you recommend that they start their research, and where are some places they can look so they make sure they know exactly what they're taking, is doing what it's supposed to do and nothing more, nothing less?
Yeah. So I love that analogy with drug companies, because I actually would say that I by and large, my trust for pharmaceutical companies is just barely higher than it is for supplement companies. Anytime that there's profit to be made, I tend to be very skeptical by nature, which is probably why I got into research, because it's always just like, okay, that's your claim. Well, we're going to test it objectively. So I view pharmaceuticals in a similar way of, it really is down to the consumer to make sure that, even a pharmaceutical product, that you actually are aware of the side effects. You're aware of who's making profits off funneling you toward a particular drug. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think making informed decisions as a consumer is always important, especially when your health is on the line.
Yeah.
So you asked about, okay, so somebody wants to take a supplement. A big portion of this burden is shifted to the consumer in terms of quality control, even more so than looking at like pharmaceutical drugs or conventional food products. Now, there's two ways to look at this. The first thing you have to make sure is, let's assume that they're giving me a quality supplement that's not tainted, that's not contaminated. Does the ingredient itself actually work? So that's kind of the first barrier to get over is, even if everything's perfect in this product as advertised, is the thing even going to work in the first place? And so for me, because I've been doing the supplement research for a while, I usually go straight to the research papers. But for most people, they're going to be hard to get through because they're written, frankly, quite poorly. Like, academic writing in science is so hard to read. It's not fun. But more importantly, like, a lot of people don't have access to the journals themselves, which is, in my opinion, a huge problem, but a very different conversation. But in any case, the ability to go into the research and dig out the findings is pretty limited. So there's one resource that I generally recommend to everybody when it comes to, is this supplement simply going to work if it is made as advertised? And that's a website called examine.com. A lot of the people that run it are friends of a friend. Everyone I've ever talked to kind of in the fitness world that knows the people behind Examine, they just say these are fantastic people that do great work. And I can tell you from evaluating their written content, it's thorough, it's evidence-based, it is objective, and it's written with the consumer's best interest in mind. So Examine is not going to say, yeah, this supplement's incredible, click the link to buy it from us. They're going to say,
it's also got citations at the end of each article too, I believe, right?
More than you'd ever want. I mean, a lot of their articles literally have hundreds of citations. And they actually have something, they kind of reformatted the website recently, but I think they still have this matrix where, let's say you are interested in creatine, but you want to know everything creatine does, not just, does it improve sprint performance? So they'll have a big like grid or a matrix of all the human studies, human only, and it'll say, here's creatine's effects on sprint capacity. Here's its effects on muscle mass. Here's its effects on bone density. And for each one of those, they will aggregate to the best of their ability all of the human research citations that look at that particular outcome. And so it's a huge resource, and you can search ingredient by ingredient, but you can also search in some cases by like the thing you're looking for. So like one instance, a lot of my clients, I do a lot of coaching online. A lot of my clients will say, I'm having trouble sleeping. I heard supplements are good for that. You on examine.com, you could literally just put in the word like sleep, and it'll bring up articles that say like, here's an overview of the supplements that might be on the list. So when it comes to finding if a supplement will be effective or efficacious, examine.com is my go-to resource aside from actually going into the peer-reviewed literature.
That's a fantastic resource. I'm glad you mentioned that, because honestly, that was what I had in mind before I asked you the question. I've been there a number of times, read the articles, very well written, very well cited, and I think you really hit on an important point. You mentioned earlier that, you know, if you want to get the best information, you would try to read the research papers, the research articles. A lot of times they're very hard to get through, whether they be monotonous or they're not necessarily written for the general public audience. And that's where websites like Stronger by Science and Mass, which I'm actually a lifetime member to the monthly application of, is it Strength Sport, I believe? Is that what this acronym is? Monthly application of Strength Sport?
I believe so, yeah.
Where you guys, basically find the most relevant and recent articles and then break them down to where, normal people like me can understand them. And also another guy, I know Jeff Nipper does a fantastic job. He's an evidence-based guy that is a very good communicator and communicates well with just general audience, general public, people who are maybe not necessarily familiar with the research paper and statistics, but they're able to translate it into a way that's enjoyable to consume and very relevant as well. So that's one of the things I definitely appreciate, guys like you that do. Makes it very helpful for me. And like I said, just another quick plug, I meant to mention it earlier and I forgot, Mass, a phenomenal monthly publication that comes out, gets emailed right to you, has a lot of articles, every month about something relevant that's going on, studies that just come out where guys like you and your business partner, Greg, you break them down, give the highs and the lows, and kind of summarize them for the average person like myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, when I was still teaching at the university, I built a course from scratch with a couple collaborators. And the whole purpose of the course was, how does a normal person who doesn't want to dedicate their life to all the nuances of science go get information from a scientific resource, determine its validity, and understand it, and then hopefully actually communicate that to others. So that's really kind of the objective with things like Stronger by Science and Mass is you go to these articles, and let's say you're lucky enough to actually get access. Most of it's behind a paywall that nobody can afford. You have to have like a university login to get to it in many cases. But let's say you get to it, the language is very confusing. It's written quite poorly, and Greg and I always laugh about it because there's no reason it has to be that way. They always write in this like third person passive voice that is just impossible to get through and adds no information to the text. It just seems more fancy and sciencey, so they do it. But yeah, our objective with like Stronger by Science and Mass is like, so there's all this research out there that people would like to be able to utilize and put into practice. Unfortunately, it's not written in a place that they can access or in a style they can access. So how do we help relay that so people can actually use it? And it's almost like a real gut check, but like for me and Greg and the guys at Mass, like Mike Zordos, Eric Helms, Jeff Nippard, if you truly understand it, you should be able to make it simple. And for us, that's kind of the big challenge is, so if we're really as smart as we like to pretend we are, which we all know that we're not, but people tell us we are, we're like, not really, but we're just really not. But if we were, that should be kind of the pinnacle of displaying proficiency. Is I can take this thing that is unnecessarily complicated in the way it's presented, and I can make it not only simple, but also applicable. And so for us, that's really the test.
Well, I like the way you say that too. And I watched a podcast on YouTube recently. I want to say it was the Iron Culture podcast with Greg and Jeff. And I think Greg made a joke that, basically trying to make science cool again. And it seems like a lot of people are really interested in these topics. But like you said, they either don't have access to it, or if you do have access to it, it's almost impossible to understand. So once again, just appreciate, the way you write the articles, how thorough you are. And also the information you put out there. So normal people like me can actually get some benefit from it. But that's definitely a very good point. Now,
Of course, yeah.
We talked about a lot of things, and I know we could continue to talk forever about the same topics we've been over the last few minutes. But there are two other topics that I really want to get into that I feel like the listeners will really be able to get a lot of benefit out from. And that's where I want to break supplements down into two distinct categories, or maybe two general categories, I guess we should say. The first being, health and wellness that help bodily functions. And then the second would be performance supplements that, either claim muscle gain, fat loss, increased endurance, whatever, anything that increases performance. I'd like to talk about the health supplements first, and maybe we can go over a few different ones in particular and talk about the things that work or maybe the things to look out for. I know for me, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, I personally take a lot of supplements, and I wish I took less. I feel like I need to take less, but it's really hard as a consumer when I read something and it says, hey, this supplement is great for your heart. And I think to myself, oh, well, that makes sense. I need to protect my heart. I'm going to take CoQ10. Or, hey, if you don't eat enough vegetables, you should take a green supplement. And I think, man, I probably don't eat as many vegetables as I should be. Well, I'm going to take a green supplement. And so if you're trying to take care of yourself, it's really easy to rack up an entire cabinet full of supplements just because you're trying to protect your kidneys and your liver and your brain function, your heart, and you take your multivitamin, and they just keep adding up and adding up and adding up. So I'm curious to know which supplements you feel like are going to be most helpful or beneficial for just general overall wellness. And then maybe we can break them down, even by organ. Like I said, as a male, I think, I need to protect my prostate, so I'll take a prostate support. Or, like say you just go on, and it's almost, you don't know when to stop. So I'd love to hear your advice about that. And then also get maybe some supplements that you think are, proven to work.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm probably going to underwhelm you here in this part of the podcast because I tend to be quite a minimalist when it comes to my own supplement choices.
Well, I think that says a lot, though. I think that's an important lesson that a lot of people can take, like myself included. Like I said, I know I probably take too many. I doubt they're detrimental, but I'm probably spending a lot of money on things that have little to no benefit.
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to like health and wellness supplements, there's a couple that I don't push people toward, but I say, hey, this might not be a terrible idea. So I'm not very big into supplementation with individual vitamins. But in many cases, especially for people who just like are unwilling to do more of like a diet overhaul, I don't think a multivitamin is a terrible idea. Now, it's very common that you'll see big research papers come out that say, yeah, we looked at this big group of people, and the people who took multivitamins were no better off than the people that didn't. And I would view that as a very positive thing, because when I hear that we looked at this huge population of, let's say, adults in the United States, and the people who took multivitamins weren't really much healthier than the people who didn't, I don't view that as multivitamins being useless or failing in their desired outcome. I view that as awesome. The United States doesn't have a rampant nutrient deficiency problem that's literally shortening people's lives. So it's really important when you look at research like that, you'll see headlines that say like, oh, study comes out showing multivitamins are useless. And it's like, well, no, the study came out showing that in America, people are not dying early of nutrient deficiencies at a large scale. That's a good thing. Now, did that study measure how people felt throughout the day? Did it measure other secondary outcomes of just like general wellness and well-being? No, it just says, will you live longer if you take a multivitamin in a country that is, has plenty of nutrients to go around. And frankly, our biggest health concern is there are too many nutrients going around in terms of energy content. So a multivitamin, if you're a person that doesn't have an extensive intake of a diverse array of foods, So a lot, not just a lot of vegetables, but a lot of different vegetables and a lot of different fruits. And we also get micronutrients from, grain products and different kinds of meat and poultry. So if you don't have a diverse food intake and you're unwilling to take a close look at it, I don't think a multivitamin's a bad idea. I also don't think that fish oil is a terrible idea. Now, I think fish oil, if you look at the literature that was coming out about, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, the science community basically started a full-blown love affair with fish oil. And it was like, it'll probably, make you build muscle, probably make you taller, probably make you more handsome. Like all these ridiculous, I mean, it was just like a cure-all for everything. And now we've kind of come back to earth a little bit. And so, again, there are plenty of studies out there showing, fish oil in this population, not a particularly huge benefit. When I look at fish oil, what I know is that humans need omega-3 fatty acids in their diet. And what I know is that marine sources of omega-3 fatty acids are very good. Plant-based omega-3 sources don't really have the same bioavailability. So if you can get it from a marine source, all the better. And so the way I look at fish oil is not that it's going to drastically improve your life, but if you're a person who doesn't eat fatty fish, it's probably not a bad idea to get some marine-based omega-3s into your diet. So I view multivitamins and fish oils as supplements to the diet, which is how this whole thing's supposed to work. So if you're not confident that you're meeting all your minimum requirements for vitamins and minerals, probably not a bad idea to take a multivitamin. If you have reason to believe that you're virtually never getting animal source omega-3s into your diet, not a horrible idea to do that via supplementation. Now, I do want to make one comment. It's a nice segue because fish oil is like a huge, when it comes to getting dietary supplements, I mentioned Examine is the place you go to figure out if they're going to work under perfect conditions. You also need resources to figure out, well, am I actually getting a product that meets that assumption? So is it high quality? Is it pure? Is it not contaminated? And so fish oil is one of the supplements that I actually tell people, spend money on fish oil. Like, don't go the cheapest you could go on this particular supplement. Because what you'll see with fish oil is, a high risk that the product will actually oxidize before you take it, which will limit its effectiveness. Potential for contamination with heavy metals and other environmental pollutants, just because of, the fish are out there swimming around and kind of accumulating these things in some cases. So when it comes to making sure that your products are actually pure and high quality and things like that, I'd want to share a couple strategies. I hope you don't mind a little
not at
a
all.
little
Yeah,
detour
please,
here.
Please do.
There are websites like consumerlab.com that actually do, and there's one called labdoor.com as well. I believe that's the name. But they do independent testing of products, looking basically at, did this product contain the amount of ingredients it claimed to? Were there any contaminants? Were there any, potentially dangerous things in there at levels to be concerned about? And so there are websites, Examine is basically like, does fish oil work? There are websites like Consumer Lab and Labdoor that say, okay, fish oil works in the right contexts, but is the fish oil that you're getting actually safe and pure? Because those are two very different, very different questions. And if you don't know that the ingredient should work and that you're actually getting that ingredient and no other dangerous things, I mean, those are both required for this to be a good decision. You know what I mean?
Right.
So another thing that you can do is you can use a third-party certified product. And without getting into a huge tangent about it, a lot of products will have on their label, this is certified by, Informed Choice or I think it's USP Labs. There's like 5 different certification groups. NSF does it, where they basically will test the product to make sure that it meets label claims and that it's free of any dangerous, hazardous materials or ingredients. So that's my little tangent on making sure you're getting quality supplements.
Well, I think there's a very close correlation too. Like fish oil is a perfect example. You can find some fish oil on Amazon that's, very inexpensive, but you can also find fish oil, at a health and wellness store, or vitamin shop, or wherever you shop, and it's very, very big discrepancy in the price. And I think that's it's confusing. I think sometimes you get what you pay for, probably, but it's also good to research that and have some resources as well so that you actually go look into it.
Yeah, and it's actually funny because it varies product by product. Save your money on creatine because creatine is just creatine. Like when it comes to buying creatine, I get the cheap stuff because it's like creatine monohydrate is so inexpensive as a raw material. If you're going to cheat me out of creatine, you're probably going to swap it out with something more expensive than creatine. You know what I mean? Like, even the filler you're finding to put in, like there's just no benefit to cheating somebody on a creatine product.
I'm the same. I've taken a generic creatine forever, whatever I can find. Creatine monohydrate, 5 grams a serving. That's about as far as I go on that one.
Exactly. But like for something like protein, like whey protein back in the day, everybody was worried about amino spiking because it was a lot cheaper to short people on the amount of actual protein and dump in a bunch of cheap free-form amino acids. So with protein, if you're buying your whey protein at, a cheaper price than the raw material cost of whey itself, you're probably getting cheated. And when it comes to fish oil, you need to rely on the company, like, where are they getting the oil from? Are they making sure that it's not exposed to light, heat, and oxygen all throughout the process of making the product and transporting the product? There's a lot of extra steps that go into cultivating and manufacturing and distributing a high-quality fish oil supplement. So that's where some of these other third-party certifications come into play. That's where some of these basically watchdog websites that will, they'll go buy a bunch of fish oil products and test it and say, yeah, these ones were oxidized on the shelf and these ones weren't. And as a consumer, I mean, it's so funny because it's like this final last step you can take in terms of quality control, but it means everything. It's literally, are you buying a product that works or not?
Yeah. Very, like I said, a lot of interesting points there. And I kind of want to go back and hit on one that you mentioned a little bit earlier. You talked about fish oil is probably a good idea, especially if you're not getting a marine source of omega-3s. And we talked about a multivitamin kind of being a lot of the studies maybe not showing huge benefits to it. I've always kind of thought of a lot of these, health and wellness type supplements as simply an insurance policy. A multivitamin is going to cost you a couple of cents a day. I don't think I have any deficiencies in minerals or vitamins, but for a few cents a day, it makes sense to take something like that just in case. I know for me, a lot of time, if I'm I've only done one contest before, but when I'm doing contest prep and even throughout the year, really, I don't have a very diverse source of foods. I pretty much eat the same thing every day because that's what I like and that's what's worked for me. I just meal prep and have the same thing, so I don't have a wide variety of foods. So I kind of see it as an insurance policy for, hey, for a couple of cents a day, I can take a multivitamin and make sure I'm at least getting everything I need. Then omega-3s, I kind of feel the same way about.
Yeah, I mean, I am exactly there with you. I take a multivitamin mostly every day, not exactly every day, because, I mean, there's enough, the doses are high enough. You don't need it necessarily once a day. And another thing people forget about is, you mentioned like contest prep, but when we have people do a weight loss diet, a lot of times their variety of food sources gets lower. Mm-hmm. And they think, sometimes people will say, well, I eat a ton of vegetables. And it's like, no, you eat a high amount of 2 vegetables. Yeah. And none of those contains a decent amount of vitamin E. So, your body won't say, hey, thanks for giving me 4 times the vitamin C I need. I'm just going to make some of that into E. Like, that's not how this works. So that's why when people start restricting calories, obviously the total amount of food is going down. But in many cases, people will subconsciously really tighten up the variety of foods. And they might have some glaring gaps in the diet when it comes to a particular micronutrient. So I think we're on the same page. Multivitamin. Now, if you eat fish, fatty fish a couple times a week, I would tell you straight up, don't waste your money. You don't need fish oil. You eat fish oil. So But when it comes to a lot of the other specialty um, supplements that are oriented toward wellness, one of the things I find is I try to hit the conference circuit and give talks, and I often give talks about supplements. And there's a lot of questions that I can't answer because there's about 1 million supplements out there for 1 million different, very specific needs. And so people say, I heard this random herbal extract that you've never heard of does this random thing in the body. And I go, I got to get back to you on that because if I had all this stuff memorized, that'd be an intellectual capacity that I'm just not equipped with. But when it comes to all these specified ingredients with very, very specific purported effects in the body, usually what I do is I follow a process. I mean, no one can keep up. And even if I knew every supplement on the market today and all of their purported effects and which ones work and which ones didn't and which ones have quality control issues, in 3 weeks, there would be new ones out. You know, you just can't keep up with it. So that's why when it comes to supplement choices as a consumer, I teach more of a process than like, let me give you a list. So, you know, every now and then I'll have clients or people at presentations, they'll say, I heard this thing's good for my prostate. What I do is I start looking at the research on it. I rely on some of the resources I've mentioned previously, and I basically look, is there any scientific literature to actually establish that link? If so, is it like, you know, sometimes you'll see these things, oh, this thing's supposed to help with a particular outcome, but it has like a 5% improvement in people that are like very, very, very seriously ill. You know, like you have to have major, major, major problems for this to actually have a meaningful effect on the outcome. You know, it's like, yeah, this thing helps with people with a very specific medical condition, but that doesn't mean it's going to have a preventative effect in an otherwise healthy person. So for me, the process with all the specialized supplements is I hear the claim, I go, okay, let's dig into it. I'll look at resources to figure out, is that link realistic, and is there an explanation for it? For whom does this work? At what dose does it work? And is this product basically known for having quality control issues? And so, you know, there are specific things where like targeted supplementation makes sense. Like there are people who have digestive issues that might benefit from a very specific digestive support supplement. The last thing I want to do is just make a blanket statement and say, nope, multivitamin and fish oil, everything else is trash, because that's not true. But you have to really take a closer look at, okay, you have digestive issues. What might be the cause of that? Do we think it's enzymatic in nature? Are there high quality products on the market that might address that? And if so, can we make that work? So unfortunately, once you get into very specific targeted supplementation interventions, there are interventions out there that make a lot of sense. But you have to kind of follow the process and weed through it step by step to figure out, you have a problem. Is the solution this supplement? And can we make sure we're getting a high quality product for it?
Well, I really like that process, and I think that's where most people miss out. You know, they read one article or they see, one fitness guy on Instagram say take this or take that, and they don't necessarily go and do the research themselves and look into it. And hey, I'm not saying you have to study for 60 hours on each multivitamin you take, but actually do some research. Go and look at the resources you've listed earlier, and I'll link those in the show notes below this video when or below this article when they post to make sure everybody has access to them. But I think it's important, kind of like you say the old saying is teach a man to fish. Versus give the man a fish, and with that process you're really just teaching someone how to fish and teaching someone how to make informed choices for themselves. So a lot of good information there. I do want to ask you,
can I give one caveat here?
Yeah, sure.
Or I guess one warning. So a great example of this, just to give a kind of instead of being hypothetical and process oriented, something to really operationalize this. So someone might come up and say, I heard carnitine helps with fat loss, right? And for me, that's like a great example of this process kind of playing out. Now, if you look at a physiology textbook, you're going to know that carnitine is critically important for the process of burning fat. No carnitine, no fat burning. That's just the way it goes. And so what you can find is a million different articles and resources saying carnitine is critical for fat burning. So you ought to take carnitine if you want to burn some fat. Now, a deeper look at it, what you find is that a carnitine deficiency is essentially a very, very, very important metabolic disorder. And if you have a carnitine deficiency, you probably know about it already. Your doctor probably found that out pretty quick. And if you don't have an inborn carnitine deficiency, taking a carnitine supplement is going to do nothing for you. And so what you find is that the surface level, it's not incorrect to say carnitine supports fat burning, but it is incorrect to say a healthy person taking carnitine is going to burn fat better. So that's kind of why you have to take some of these steps to figure out how does it work, who does it work for, and is that me?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I really want to get into the performance supplements, kind of like we talked about. But I have one more health and wellness supplement that I have to ask you about, because if you ever watch Dr. Oz or you've ever signed on to Facebook or Instagram, you've seen everybody and their brother selling a CBD supplement, which claims to be, the end-all, be-all cure for everything. You'll feel better, look better. Do you know of any information out there on a CBD? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this that they've at least heard of it. I would be willing to bet most people have, or a lot of people have tried it. But I've not seen a whole lot of definitive information. I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so CBD is interesting. If you read the article on Stronger by Science, the thing about CBD is that, in my opinion, which doesn't matter, it's really not a supplement. What does matter is that the FDA agrees with me. So like the FDA keeps saying like CBD oil is not a supplement. Please stop selling it as a supplement, because it's not one. And it's still just all over the supplement market. So this is like, it's kind of like how the federal government says, at least up until I forget where the legislation's at on this, but, for a while there, the federal government was, hey, marijuana is illegal. And all these states were like, well, we're going to sell it anyway, for medicinal and then eventually recreational. So we kind of see a similar thing going on with CBD oil, where the FDA keeps telling people, hey, this is not a supplement. And people are just selling it as a supplement anyway, kind of calling their bluff, like, you're not going to enforce this on this big a scale. So when it comes to CBD oil, I'm pretty sure that they have taken steps toward actually creating CBD-based drugs, which is going to make it very difficult for CBD to become a recognized supplement, because it already kind of went through the drug approval process. And once you're a drug, you're kind of a drug. But there's going to be a lot of activity on the legislative side of determining whether or not CBD is going to ever be considered a supplement. I have a suspicion that it will, but the FDA is going to have to just basically break a lot of its own rules and say, fine, we're just going to let this through. Now, in terms of what it does, I think there is a decent amount of evidence because it went through some of the steps required for drug approval. So there actually are like legit clinical trials on some of the things that CBD can do. The problem is that is with meticulously manufactured drug quality CBD preparations. And my concern is that because CBD is frankly not a supplement technically, what exactly are the quality control measures going into the production of CBD products? What are the standardizations that are considered acceptable for the industry, knowing that the industry in its entirety is essentially not in adherence with federal law? My concern about CBD is I think that it's been established in the medical literature that there are some applications. But the question is the CBD product that you're getting as a supplement actually created with the same standards as those researched preparations? And I don't have a great deal of confidence in that. But if somebody said, hey, there's this research on CBD, I found a company that I think is on the up and up that's making good stuff, I would imagine that many of those benefits might translate. Now, I haven't looked extensively into what exactly those benefits are. I often hear things about helping with pain or with anxiety and things of that nature. I think certain studies have maybe looked at brain trauma, like mild traumatic brain injuries. I'm speaking way out of turn here. I haven't looked extensively at that literature. Those are the things I hear about most commonly when people bring up CBD. So I don't want to discount the possibility that you could find a good CBD product on the market and that it could have some of those effects that are being claimed. One of the things to keep in mind, though, and this kind of goes into the third party testing stuff. If you work in an occupation in which a failed THC drug test could cost you your job, or could get you banned from competition, or could make you lose your athletic records, I personally would not go near a CBD supplement for fear that in the production process, maybe there could be some contamination in which the THC level would exceed the threshold that's allowable. So my take on it is, if I was dealing with somebody who could lose their job or really, really miss out on things from a failed THC test with low THC levels in the blood, I'd be extremely concerned about getting anything that was not very, very, very rigorously tested in terms of production quality.
And that's scary for almost everybody out there. I mean, it seems like most people that have, normal jobs, you get drug tested and you just can't reasonably take that risk, especially if you're not sure exactly what you're getting or what benefits it's going to provide.
Yeah, and it's a hypothetical. If you talk to anybody that's in the CBD side of the industry, they'll say that's ridiculous. The THC levels are always low. We stay within that whatever percentage is the cutoff, and it'll never give you a failed drug test. And that's cool if you intend to, take that at face value. But I'm a very hyper cautious individual by nature. So I personally, I compete in natural bodybuilding. I'm not taking it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it makes sense. But let's go ahead and let's get into some of the performance enhancing supplements. And you mentioned it earlier in the show, probably 5 or 10 minutes in, talking about some of the claims that companies can make, with the FTC or with, the FTC regulating advertising and claims. It seems like there's a lot of supplements out there that make outlandish claims. They'll do this, they'll do that. You drink our skinny tea, you put on the sweat belt, or you take this, drop 10 pounds in 10 days, whatever it is. There's a lot of claims out there. And I feel like that's one reason that people find it hard to trust supplement companies, because everybody's claiming they have these outrageous benefits for just popping a pill or taking a magic powder. But there definitely are some that are proven to work. I think there's probably a lot more that don't have the proof behind them. But I'd love to go ahead and get your thoughts. We spoke about creatine a little bit earlier. It seems like creatine is, at this point, it's a unanimous vote. Creatine is going to increase performance, and it's going to be safe, for long-term use. But besides creatine, and there's a great article on creatine, just came out recently on your website that you wrote, strongerbyscience.com. Plug that one more time, and I'll link that below as well. But for something like creatine, what else would you kind of put in that same category of a supplement that someone can buy and actually expect to see an improved performance out of it?
Yeah, so I basically I view it kind of in tiers, like top tier, second tier, third tier. When it comes to anything strength and sprint related, creatine is completely in a league of its own. It is the top tier, and it's alone up there. In the strength and sprint kind of world, the high intensity sport, the second tier, you find other things like, I think caffeine would fit there. So we're talking about things that, there's evidence to suggest they enhance performance, but it's either not to the same degree as creatine or maybe not as consistently as creatine. So maybe it works for, some people and not others. So I think caffeine fits there. I think sodium bicarbonate fits there. I think beta-alanine might fit there. And I would say some of the nitric oxide boosters, so like nitrate or beetroot juice or citrulline malate, I think that's kind of the group of things that you see in the second tier when it comes to strength and sprint outcomes.
Let me go ahead and ask you about, you just mentioned citrulline. That's one of the ones I wanted to bring up. I know when I read a lot of supplement labels, most of the supplements that contain citrulline, it's a citrulline malate. Some of them also contain just an L-citrulline. Is there a difference? Should people, take one over the other?
Um, the short answer is it's hard to say for sure. Um, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When it comes to the citrulline literature for strength outcomes, it seems that the citrulline malate studies seem to work pretty well. They're not, it's not a night and day difference. It's not like the next creatine by any means, but the problem is that we don't have enough of the just pure L-citrulline studies looking at these strength outcomes to say, oh, you'd be fine with either one. Now, malate is, or malic acid is a TCA cycle intermediate, and basically what that means is it facilitates ATP production. But when we look at the literature on how some of these other TCA intermediates affect exercise performance, they really don't seem to have much effect on their own. So you could make the argument that maybe there's something about these two things working together that is like a special synergistic relationship. I personally find that a little bit difficult to believe, but I can't discount it based on the limited evidence. So the take home point there is, I think the safest bet in terms of what seems to work well in the literature for now would be citrulline malate with a 2-to-1 ratio of citrulline to malate. I think if you were concerned about, just making the most cautious approach based on what seems to work in the literature, I think that's what you would go with. And a benefit of that is citrulline malate tastes fantastic. And I believe that the malic acid is really what drives that taste. It's got like a very nice natural sour flavor to it. Citrulline malate is not particularly expensive. So for all the reasons involved, I would say the safest bet is probably citrulline malate. But I do suspect that citrulline itself is pushing all, if not most, of the effects that we see.
Okay, and that's a fair enough answer. That's a great recommendation that people can go follow and do some research on their own for those supplements. There's a long list of performance enhancing supplements or supplements that claim to enhance performance. One that seems like over the past couple of years has been getting a lot of research or maybe a lot of time put into it. I think for the longest time people took BCAAs, intra workout or in between meals, and then it seems like people over the past couple of years have really tried to shift that towards EAAs. What are your thoughts about, I guess, BCAAs versus EAAs? Should we be taking either of them, or is it all overboard, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that logically speaking, the case for EAAs is better than that for BCAAs. I think when you try to put together justifications and circumstances in which BCAAs would be a great choice, you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics and work pretty hard to construct a scenario in which BCAAs look like a must-have supplement. So I don't believe I've ever recommended BCAAs to a client, which I think says a lot. Because I've had clients with a whole lot of different scenarios and circumstances, and I've never been like, what's going to get us out of this jam? BCAA.
BCAA.
Right. So I mean, if I haven't come across it yet, I don't know when it would happen.
Sure. Now,
essential amino acids, I think, have a much better justification, because if you're trying to build proteins, you're going to need all the essential amino acids. Even then, last time I checked, the word on the street was that they're not particularly cheap and they don't taste particularly good. I mean, this was years ago, and maybe they've made some improvements in both of those areas. But for me, usually I just tell people to eat food with protein in it, preferably from animal sources more often than not, assuming that they're not vegetarian, vegan. Now, I think essential amino acids probably have a decent potential for application in a vegan diet, assuming that the person's not willing to put all the effort into kind of matching complementary proteins. So I think essential amino acids have some limited applications. I think if you're eating a meal that tends to just be low in essential amino acids, I don't see any problem in using EAAs to kind of bring that up to approximately what a more complete protein source would look like. And in some select cases, maybe you could say that, oh, well, I'm eating this meal and it's got plenty of amino acids, but the one thing it's missing is leucine or whatever. So yeah, maybe BCAAs make sense there, but in both of these cases, you have to kind of construct some pretty specific scenarios in which it makes a lot of sense. I would say if you're a person that's not vegetarian or vegan, you probably don't need to be too worried about going with either.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good to know, because, like I said, there's people out there that think that if they've not taken their BCAAs or their EAAs, that they're just going to wither away and lose all their muscle or lose their gains. So I think it's important that people kind of learn, what they do and learn the difference, and also learn that it's best to get them from your diet if possible, and really just supplement as a secondary source.
Yeah, I think so. I've got some friends that are dietitians. And there's often a big disconnect between the dietitians and then the non-dietitian nutrition people.
The bros, can we call them bros?
Sure. So I think one of the reasons that the dietitians don't hate me as much as they hate everybody else is because I do take the food first approach. I'm like, well, why should we try to construct this diet from a series of isolated ingredients and like why do we have to work this hard to build a meal when you could have just had chicken and maybe like a vegetable or two?
Right.
Like why do we have to inflate the cost and make this like a chemistry experiment? So generally speaking, I do kind of advocate like food first, but there are some instances where supplementation makes sense, like food first, but where are you going to get your 5 daily grams of creatine? Not from food.
That's a lot of red meat. Yeah.
It's a lot of red meat. You're not going to have a good time. Food first, but if you really hate fatty fish or you don't like to cook it, or it's, out of your price range in terms of your food sources, okay, well, we'll go with the fish oil. We can easily top that off. So I think that, hugely problematic diets cannot be rescued by supplementation. That it's really just putting the finishing touches on what should hopefully already be a solid foundation in terms of the diet.
Yep, good point. Well, let me ask you, I know we're taking a lot of your time. I want to ask you about two more things specifically before we get off here. But if I had to guess, again, I'm a almost 40-year-old guy. I'm 37. It seems like the two most popular supplements for guys in my age group are going to be fat burners and going to be test boosters, which I've got my thoughts on each. But quickly, I'd love to know what you think about, the fat burning category and then the test boosting category.
I've never found a fat burner that brought me much more than a cup or two of coffee. To be completely frank, most of the really effective fat burning products are already banned. There was the ephedrine back in the day, and then all the ingredients with the geranium root or the dimethylamine. A lot of the stuff that seems to work quite well. I mean, DNP, which is dangerously effective, so effective that it's like, God, get that off the market, because it was just, horrifically dangerous if not used properly. So most of the really effective fat burning stuff is gone because a lot of times there's just, if it works, there's often complications that we can't really wrangle and can't really get a handle of, and it introduces a dangerous element with adverse events. Most fat burners, you're going to be looking at a decent amount of caffeine, which is going to explain most of the increase in the short-term increase in metabolic rate. You're also going to see maybe some appetite suppressants in there. Appetite suppressants are very hit or miss in the literature, and they have to be dosed properly. And basically, I've never found a fat burner supplement that I've recommended to a client. And again, I think that kind of speaks a lot.
Yeah, for me, so just doing the research that I've done, and obviously you've done a lot more than me, but I think what you said was exactly what I found. It seems like fat burners, they're really some sort of stimulant, usually caffeine, and then most of them have an appetite suppressant. And I think a lot of people get confused because they think taking the pill actually is going to burn fat, when it's almost maybe a byproduct of moving more, having less of an appetite. It's maybe possibly helping get you in a caloric deficit, which is ultimately what's going to, make you lose the body fat or lose the weight anyway. So
Yeah.
the fat burners aren't necessarily, they're not magic. They're not doing anything other than maybe helping you get through a tough workout or helping you get maybe an energy boost.
I also have a somewhat unpopular opinion that I don't like to make hunger and appetite the enemy. I don't like to make it something that when I'm helping somebody lose weight, that we fear and we hide from. And I'm not at all the person who says this is going to suck and you're going to be starving and we're going to embrace that because we're tough. That's not the approach I take. But what I don't like to do is give the threat of hunger or an elevated appetite power over, dictating exactly how miserable we are. So I like to actually just say, hey, listen, frankly, a lot of the evidence on these appetite suppressants isn't that great anyway. But more importantly, let's not give appetite the power to dictate our day and to make us scared of this process. You're going to be hungry sometimes, but you're not going to die. We know that we know you have energy coming down the line. The only reason hunger gives us such a visceral response is because from an evolutionary perspective, that usually means, hey, we might die. Clearly we don't have enough energy. We're running low on food. Maybe we're going to starve to death. But we know cognitively that's not the case. So let's relax. Let's learn to live with it and not hide from it and try to make some weird supplement stack that's going to eliminate that from our reality.
Sure. Well, what are your thoughts about the test boosters? I've never seen, and again, you've researched this stuff a lot more than me. I've never seen any conclusive evidence that the supplements at GNC, in the glass locked case, do anything that are particularly magic for increasing testosterone. But again, love to hear your thoughts and what research you found about those.
Yeah, so back in the day, they had a lot of products that were really just kind of anabolic compounds in disguise. This was all prior to like 2014, but late 90s, early 2000s, they were everywhere. And so those ones worked, but I mean, they weren't really test boosters. Again, they were just kind of anabolics in disguise. Those have yeah. So those have largely been taken off the market as of like 2014. And so now when you look at that, kind of class of supplements, it's all the other test boosters, which frankly, even the ones that do cause a measurable change in testosterone, when we look at testosterone and, depending on where you're looking and, the units and whatnot, they usually say, the male value is one between like 300 and 1,000 with a certain measure of unit. And, I think one of the inherent assumptions we make is within this range of like 300 to 1,000 or whatever it is. If I go from 450 to 475, that's going to matter in any meaningful way. And I would argue it won't. So what my interpretation of the kind of natural test boosters on the market is that even if they do kind of move the needle a little bit in terms of making a measurable change in testosterone, the question is the change in testosterone big enough to make a measurable, noticeable difference when it comes to, what you're looking for, which is basically energy level, libido, maybe body composition, performance. And so far, my interpretation of the literature is that there's really nothing out there that's going to move the number in a magnitude large enough to have those types of effects.
Yeah, I think you're right, and obviously, like I said a number of times today, you've done a lot more research on this stuff than I have. But I was watching another podcast or listening to a video on YouTube maybe recently. I think it was Mike Israetel talking about the exact same thing. I can't remember which podcast it was or which show it was, but basically said if there was going to be a difference, it wouldn't be enough to make any sort of measurable impact where you would notice a difference. While it technically on paper may have some effect, it's not enough to really notice it in the real world.
And so I don't want to come off in this conversation as like, oh, Eric Trexler hates supplements, because it really couldn't be further from the truth. And there's a lot of people I know that probably think I am a little bit too complimentary of certain supplements. But for me, me and you and all the listeners, we're consumers, and I think as a consumer, it's a very fair expectation for me to basically tell a company, if you would like my money, and I know you do, I expect you to convince me that you are going to actually deliver on this. So what I want you to do is fund studies that actually show an effect that is meaningful in magnitude in terms of the outcomes. I want you to do third-party testing to assure me that you're not going to poison me or cheat me out of money. And if those criteria are met, and this company has acted in good faith and shown me, hey, you should buy my supplement because it does what we're telling you it does, and we can assure you it's going to be safe and pure. Absolutely. So, do I use supplements? Yeah, I use a multivitamin, fish oil, protein, creatine, sometimes beta-alanine, sometimes citrulline, sometimes I usually get nitrate from food, but I have used beet powders in the past. I don't necessarily recommend that. But yeah, so another thing is even some of the more obscure supplements. So when I take caffeine, I take it with theanine and tyrosine, because I find that it makes the caffeine, my subjective experience of that stimulation is very much improved by combining it with theanine and tyrosine, and it comes down to how those supplements affect certain neurotransmitters. Sometimes I take ashwagandha because it actually has some decent peer-reviewed literature showing that certain high-quality forms of ashwagandha might help with anxiety. Now, if you're experiencing anxiety, go to a doctor immediately. Don't listen to me. But yeah, so I'm not the type of person that immediately writes off all supplements as, it's probably snake oil, seems like BS, don't do it. I just think that it's very fair for a consumer to expect the company to earn my money, and that as a consumer, the burden, as we've talked about, the burden is shifted on me to figure out, are these going to work, and how do I get a product of high enough quality to actually justify the expense?
And I think that's a perfectly fair stance to take. Hey, listen to the companies. If as long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, they're doing the research, they're getting tested, so that we can ensure it's safe. It kind of becomes our responsibility to do some research and figure out what type of effect it's going to have in our body, and how it's going to react. So I thought this conversation was great. It wasn't necessarily, hey, take these 4 things, don't take this thing. Hopefully what we'll do is help people make better educated decisions about what supplements, if any, they're going to put in their body to supplement their diet. But man, excellent stuff, Eric. I know we've taken a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. I want to remind everybody again that you do coaching at strongerbyscience.com. You also write for Mass, but people can find you on Instagram as well. I'll link all those in the show notes. But tell us, for people who are wanting to get in touch with you or maybe learn a little bit more, what are some of the places they can go to look and find you?
So, small distinction. I don't write for Mass, but I do write for Stronger by Science, which does sell Mass on our website. But
sorry,
people will find that out if they order Mass, which they should. Yeah, so you can find me at strongerbyscience.com. You can find me on Facebook. My name's Eric Trexler. On Instagram, it's at Trexler Fitness. But yeah, I'd spent the last 6 years just kind of doing research in a basement laboratory, and now I'm kind of actually going on podcasts and kind of entering the industry side of the fitness world. So I've been trying to get a lot better at interacting on social media, and it's very helpful if you add me on social media and make me interact. So yeah, go find me and start a conversation and force me to come out from my basement laboratory.
Well, that's how I found you. I was watching Jeff Nippard's podcast where you were talking about metabolic adaptations, and I try to stay pretty in tune with what's going on in the fitness industry and the fitness world, and I believe that was my first exposure to you, and it seems like since then you've done a really good job whether it be, posting more often, being a guest on more shows, just kind of putting yourself out there and helping spread information. But it seems like you've been doing a really good job of that lately. So like I say, I'll definitely link your social media accounts below. And also just this past week, which this episode will probably air in a couple of weeks, but you started your podcast with Greg, the Stronger by Science podcast. So I'd also recommend listeners to check that one out as well. I know that's probably a fun venture you have going on.
It's a lot of fun. And yeah, like you mentioned, when I kind of started doing the podcast circuit a little bit, people are like, why haven't I heard of you? And I was like, well, because I just didn't talk. I kept to myself for 6 years. So people were like, where have you been? And I'm like, basically hiding, but I'm out of hiding. And yeah, so on social media, the podcast has been fantastic. We put out an episode every other Thursday. So episodes coming out every 2 weeks, and they're a lot of fun. And so if you go to Stronger by Science or Mass, there's a lot of like super technical content that's delivered, pretty business-like, straight to the point. The podcast allows us to, we still cover a lot of pretty technical information, but we do it in a much more laid back, informal type of format. So it's a lot of fun, and we've got some really, really fun interviews on that podcast as well.
Well, good. Well, I'm looking forward to some more episodes. Like I said, I just listened to the first one as I was driving a couple of days ago. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thought you guys were very entertaining and knowledgeable as well. So I had a great time listening to it, and I would definitely recommend everyone else check that out as well. But Eric, man, tremendous resource on a lot of different topics, particularly the supplements we talked about today. Really appreciate your time. So I wanted to thank you one more time for coming on the show, and look forward to talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Train with Zan podcast.
Where our goal is to help you look, feel, and perform like an athlete.
Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening and follow Zan on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
The training doesn't have to stop here. For today's show notes and more information about training, nutrition, and fitness,
head on over to trainwithxan.com and join the team.